This video is brought to you by Nvidia and the new MSI GP66 Leopard 30 series laptop, which I got to check out as part of this review. Stick around to hear more about how Nvidia's and MSI's next-gen hardware can transform the way you play. One day, when I'm an old man and I retire from the YouTube grind, I'm gonna sell my Lambo and all my pixel art NFTs that I bought for $100 million, and this weird, creepy baby in a jar thing that I got with my copy of Death Stranding, and I'm gonna move out to the woods in a little log cabin, and there, on an old-timey typewriter, I'm gonna write my book. And you know what it's gonna be called? It's gonna be called Dumbass. The inside story of a man who wasted too much of his life playing broken looter shooters at launch. A memoir. Why do I keep doing this to myself? Ladies and gentlemen, Outriders is here. I have played about 55 hours of it now. I have finished the campaign. I have hit max level. I have reached deep into the endgame. I'm ready to tell you what I think about this game, and let me begin by saying this. I really hate that I can't recommend this to you. Outriders tacitly positioned itself as the anti-looter shooter, promising a campaign worth playing, a story with some actual effort put into it, build diversity that mattered during the campaign, a complete endgame experience that we could play on day one rather than needing to wait months or years for it to be patched in. And the thing is, they did it. The absolute madmen and women at People Can Fly delivered everything they promised. This is a superbly well-designed game, so much so that I am at times in awe of just how they managed to pull this off. It's some of the most balls-to-the-walls ridiculous loot flexibility I've ever seen in a looter, with perks that just should not exist because they're so fucking strong, and yet the game hangs together. There are viable choices across the different classes, skill trees, and perk pools. Encounter design doesn't completely crumple under the weight of all this flexibility, but nor does it feel like this impenetrable wall of bullet sponge enemies who just one-shot you when they glance in your general direction. So they pulled it off, they really did. Better than I anticipated, in fact. But my god in heaven, if this game isn't absolutely fucking balked at the moment. The technical issues this game suffers from right now are so profound and so destructive that it's just impossible to recommend this product at the moment. It's not just the server issues you've heard so much about, it's also client stability, where this game has crashed more than any other PC game I've ever reviewed. It's also just the general bugginess, some of which can completely wipe your character progress. All the items you spent dozens of hours grinding for, they just vanish in an instant. Outriders positioned itself as the anti-live service game, but when it comes to the technical side, it does a pretty good job of aping every single one of the technical issues that have plagued this style of game. The good news, though, is that unlike so many of the unfinished, uninteresting, phoned-in, microtransaction-laden live service scams we've endured, Outriders is really good. And when the fog of all these technical issues has lifted, we're going to be left with a brilliant game that I suspect will have a big, bright future as one of the new pillars of the looter shooter genre. I can't recommend Outriders to you yet, but when I can, I'm going to recommend it to you very strongly. Outriders is a game set in a post-apocalyptic future where rednecks have stormed the DC capital. The developers claimed that this line of dialogue was a coincidence, by the way. That's one hell of a coincidence. Global warming wins and humanity is pushed into an interstellar life raft to survive. Arriving at the planet Enoch, or Nucky as it's more affectionately known, an elite vanguard unit known as Outriders are charged with the task of making landfall first. You play as one of these Outriders, and while your first moments on Enoch are green fields and wandering herds reminiscent of the first act of Jurassic Park, it soon turns into poisonous black goo, debilitating storms, and giant killer monsters, reminiscent of the rest of Jurassic Park. For some reason, your character is put on ice for 30 years and awakens to find that Enoch wasn't quite the paradise everyone hoped for. Everyone is older, uglier, and has developed one hell of an attitude.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Look, I got a war to win, so either you help me, or you get back into cryo.
You, on the other hand, are fresh as a daisy, and with a renewed spring in your step owing to the fact that you now have superpowers, making you basically invincible and giving you control over various forms of elemental magic. 1 or 2 tutorial missions later, you're on your hero's quest to find the source of a mysterious signal that may be humanity's last hope at a life a little less shit than the one they're currently forced to endure. As I spoke about in my preview, the looter shooter genre typically doesn't do so well with the whole campaign thing. They're either really brief, anemic affairs like pretty much every Destiny campaign, or they're crudely smearing some story over their limited areas and endgame missions like Anthem, or they're completely divorced from the endgame experience entirely, like Marvel's Avengers, which had a surprisingly good campaign that bore no resemblance whatsoever to what it would be like to play the game after you rolled credits. There are some exceptions to this, of course. The Borderlands series has always had a satisfying campaign, even if Borderlands 3's writing was pretty insufferable, and The Division 2 had an excellent campaign that did mirror what it would be like to play the game at endgame. It's just that the post-launch updates for that game were nowhere near regular or meaty enough to compete in what is already a highly competitive genre. Outriders' campaign feels so unique compared to everything else because it looks at all the failures of those other games and says, not today. It clocks in at a meaty 25 plus hours depending on how you approach it, so it's anything but short. It serves up story right the way through, and while opinions on it are mixed, you can tell the developers really didn't half-ass the effort here. The campaign missions are entirely separate from the missions you'll run at the endgame, so no recycled content, but unlike Avengers, it's all connected by a combat loop and a loot gain that doesn't sit idle and wasted until you reach the endgame. You start to feel all of the components working together almost immediately. As I said in my preview, Outriders isn't a game where you need to play for 50 hours to find the fun. It's fun right away, and just on that basis alone, Outriders is doing a hell of a lot better than many of its contemporaries. When it comes to the story, there's definitely mixed opinion on this one. The thrust of it is essentially a road trip. Like imagine Mad Max Fury Road, complete with everyone being a kind of pissed off asshole, only Mad Max was essentially perfect, and this is definitely not. A lot of people have really enjoyed the story and found it a compelling carrot to spur them forward. They point to a cast of characters that they want to learn more about, and yeah, I actually agree with that. You've got some broken-spirited soldiers and ruthless warlords, and one dude who seems like an NPC pulled straight from GTA.
Oh, thank fucking God! About time they sent an altered.
One of the big surprises here was just how well voice acted all of this is. There's humanity in this writing, and the voice actors do a great job of conveying that. They do feel like real people trapped in a shitty situation, and I enjoyed that. Facial capture as well is really great, though there are some pretty bad audio desync issues in quite a few of the cutscenes that really weaken them. My biggest problem with this is that the story just goes nowhere. The game never sets up a proper villain, only these sort of temporary mini-bosses that just get tossed away at a moment's notice. The mystery of the signal looks like it's building to this really big reveal, like a huge plot twist that really clicks everything into place and opens up so many possibilities. Instead, it just completely face plants its finale, delivering something so boring, so lame, and just bad. You might ask, should I play this game for the story? Some people will say yes. I don't understand those people. I think there's a lot of reasons to play this game, but in my book, the story definitely isn't one of them. The campaign structure is fairly straightforward. There's a world map that you're making your way across, and each of the nodes represent an area to explore. Explore really isn't the right word though, since what you'll find is that each of these spaces are very linear. There might be a choice to go left or right at certain points, but that's a choice between sticking to the main path or deviating for a temporary detour, which when you're done with it, you're going to have to come back to the main path. The map is also highly fragmented, needlessly and painfully so. See, the map isn't contiguous like you're seeing here, it's actually a set of individual sections broken up by loading screens. So if you want to go to a new area, it like fades to black, and then your character will like lift a log up or jump over a gap. That fades to black, and then it fades back into the area and you can keep going. It's like the old school Resident Evil door opening animations from the PS1 days, only these are worse because you know the technology has advanced to the point where this just isn't necessary anymore. There's also the issue where in order to move to a specific location in a different zone on the world map, you first need to fast travel back to your camp, that's a loading screen, talk to this NPC, select the destination, that's a loading screen, and then you go over to your flag, select a new destination, another loading screen, and then you walk over to your final destination, another loading screen, and then you're back in. See? Seamless. Much of the critical commentary about Outriders has been that it feels last gen. I don't agree with this in general, but I do agree with it when it comes to this fragmented level design. The way you move through this world is so constantly interrupted that it really starts to grate. and it just, yeah, it feels outdated because we've all played modern open world games, including looter shooters, that do a far, far better job than this. Many people are going to say that this campaign is highly repetitive, and they're absolutely right. Perhaps of all the looter shooter campaigns I've played, except maybe Anthem, this one is the most repetitive, but that doesn't mean it's bad. See, the way it works is that you'll arrive at a new destination, you'll have to go to some point on the map to kill someone or to click on a thing, and you go there and you shoot shit, and that's it. There's zero variance to the formula I have just described. There are no missions where you need to hold down a point. There are no objectives where you need to escort a troop carrier and stop it from taking damage. There are no like timed mission things where you need to survive for a certain period of time. You never pilot any vehicles. There's no effort to dress up these missions at all. You never do anything other than exactly what I've described to you. Go to the place, watch the loading screens, shoot the things, collect the loot. So if this is repetitive, then why doesn't it suck? As we've talked about on this channel before, all games are repetitive. The challenge that developers face is to trick you into not noticing they are repetitive by creating a 30-second loop so compelling that you're just along for the ride. And Outriders does exactly that. This game throws just enough enemy variety, just enough level design variety, and more than enough loot to just keep you plowing forward. You're always doing the exact same thing in Outriders, but you're never getting bored of it because People Can Fly have nailed down the fundamentals of their game so soundly. We're going to talk about those fundamentals in a separate block, but before that we should pause to talk about the technical state of this game because I don't want to get you all hyped up hearing all that stuff before you've heard this technical stuff because it's seriously like yikes. Outriders received considerable praise for the fact that it offered up a demo a full month before launch. This was an actual demo, mind you, containing the full prologue, and it was open to anyone who wanted to download it. It wasn't some pre-order only bullshit. Not only did this demo give us a chance to check out the game and see if we liked it, it gave People Can Fly and Square Enix a chance to test their server infrastructure, iron out technical issues, and trim the sails on any glaring gameplay balance problems that popped up. Hell, the demo was patched twice before the game was even released, so you'd think that come launch day, this game would be in pretty good shape. Hell no! Outriders continues the long tradition of looter shooters being absolutely catastrophically bad during their launch windows. Why is this a thing? Why is this genre so cursed? Anyway, let's talk about the issues. Server stability was and is still the big one. During the first 1 or 2 days of launch, people simply couldn't log in for long stretches of time, stuck on the signed in page for an eternity, or when they finally did get in, it just boots them back to loading screen for whatever reason. Progress is being made on these server issues though, and when they do stabilize, eventually people will start to realize just how fucking broken this game is from a stability perspective, at least when you're playing on PC. I've never played a PC game that's crashed more than this. I know that's a big call, I know I've played all the bullshit Anthem, Silver 76, Avengers, whatever. This game's crashed more than any of those, like by far. I've played about 60 hours now, and I must have crashed at least 60 times. I mean, one crash an hour feels generous, it's probably more than that. Crashes can occur at any time, whether it's during combat or in towns, but in particular, they happen when you open or close menus. Interestingly enough, the game saves crash data when you crash, and when I went into my app data folder, I had around 20 gigabytes of crash data just sitting there on my hard drive, so be sure to delete that if you're brave enough to play at the moment. Bottom line, for PC, this is one of the worst games I've played from a stability perspective, like ever, full stop, ever. It's utterly ridiculous. I just can't recommend this to you in good conscience at the moment because it's too broken. We'll talk console performance briefly since I also played this on the Xbox Series X and the PS5. The server issues I spoke about existed there as well. However, the console ports are way more stable in terms of crashing. I've only spent about 5 hours with each port and had no crashes during that time. Reports from people who are playing exclusively on consoles are that, yeah, the game is a lot more stable there. They have more party networking issues though, with widespread reports of people simply being disconnected from one another when they're in a party, and yeah, that just ends your game session. So that's server stability and client stability. Let's talk about bugs. There are definitely plenty of bugs. Even if you set your matchmaking to friends only, random people will keep joining your party, your HUD will constantly disappear for no reason, and you can't see your abilities, or you can't interact with anything in the world. There was this one bug where my character is just invisible and I can't do anything and I need to restart the game. Enemies would often float in the air. We found one bug where the Devastator's ability would constantly make the enemy fall through the map, and if one enemy falls through the map during an endgame mission, it's mission fail because you have to kill all of the enemies to progress, so that's really annoying. It's also very common for your drops to not be saved server-side. On at least a dozen occasions, I've got some really nice drops, only to then crash, and then the drops have just mysteriously vanished from my inventory by the time I log back in. The biggest issue though, is an absolutely game-breaking bug doing the rounds right now associated with matchmaking. If you try and matchmake at the endgame, it can bug out, and it will delete every single item you have. If you have spent 60 to 100 hours farming gear, it's gone. No way to get it back. For this reason, I strongly recommend that you do not matchmake because it's just not worth the risk. So yeah, just a few issues with this game. Performance-wise, this is a mixed bag. Consoles first, on both the Xbox Series X and the PS5, I was extremely impressed with performance. This isn't a particularly pretty looking game, but there's a lot going on at any point in time. A lot of enemies, a lot of particle effects, a lot for your console's GPU to crunch. Both consoles handled things flawlessly. They employed dynamic resolution scaling to keep things between 1440p and 4K. I certainly experienced rock-solid frame rates when I tested them. The ever-reliable Digital Foundry did their own tests on the demo version of the game and found that the Xbox Series X ran at around 50 to 60 FPS, and the PS5 was very rarely dropping below 60. On previous gen consoles, you can expect the game to run at 30 FPS with some frame drops when the action is particularly thick. Overall though, really impressive performance on consoles, which is great. PC is more complicated. First of all, the settings menu is decent. You can now reduce the camera shake during cutscenes, which is a godsend because my god, that was bad. You can change your field of view up to a max of 90, which isn't great to be honest. I personally play all games at 105. I definitely found the perspective too narrow for my taste, particularly when you're aiming down sights, since your character just takes up so much of the damn screen and you lose so much of your peripheral vision. There is now also a motion blur toggle, which is great because motion blur sucks, you all know that. One thing that isn't there though is a screen shake toggle, and this is a big problem because at the end game, a lot of it is about being surrounded by enemies that just love shaking your screen. One enemy type in particular is just out of control. You can barely aim your weapon sometimes. This toggle needs to be added, or the screen shake needs to be toned down because it's too much right now. One important thing to note is that if you're playing on PC with a controller, there is no option to remap buttons. That sucks. Hopefully that can be patched in. I tested Outriders on two different desktop PCs, an RTX 3080 at 1440p ultra settings and an RTX 2080 Ti running at 4K ultra settings. Across both machines, frame rates were better than expected, but were wildly inconsistent. I played on a 144Hz monitor on my RTX 3080, and I was able to hit that, but just as often things would drop down to like 80 frames, and it wasn't necessarily because of on-screen action, it would just randomly drop for no reason. Same goes for the 2080 at 4K resolution. I generally sat at around 100 frames there, but it would often drop down to 60 frames whenever it felt like it. Like pretty much any game that has it, DLSS does a huge amount of heavy lifting here. There are a number of DLSS settings that will up the intensity of it, but the bottom line is that I picked up at least 25% more stability when I had it enabled. I wasn't able to magically keep at a steady frame rate, it just kept me at a higher average frame rate, which is better than nothing. Outside of this, the frame rate performance of Outriders is better than I thought it would be. Certainly coming off the back of stuff like Avengers, its massive frame rate fluctuations really hurt combat because it would dip so low when you really need high frames for that kind of game. Here, at least on these GPUs, and when you're using DLSS, you can maintain the 60 FPS you're looking for, and the rest is sort of gravy. I know we always want more frames, but what I'm saying is that you're not going to wipe because your game suddenly drops to 15 FPS and you couldn't react to what's going on around you. It is inconsistent, but it clears the minimum requirement, and that's something. Overall, the technical state of this game is really shameful. It's one of the most broken games I've played in a long time. Putting up with the constant disconnects, the constant crashes, the constant fear of my loot being deleted, it was terrible, and it's such a shame because I've low-key loved this game, and were it this in even passable state, I would recommend it to you today. As it stands though, I can't, As I said before, Outriders kind of positioned itself as this anti-live service looter shooter, but it still has all the problems that genre is most known for. We were all hoping Outriders would be different. I was hoping it would be different. When it comes to the technical stuff, it simply wasn't. But let's pretend for a moment that this game works. What's it like when it comes to combat? Well, I'm gonna tell you. Fucking great. I love it. And goddamn, it's so good. A while back, I talked about the fact that while the Outriders campaign was really repetitive, it was also really good, and I put this down to the fact that People Can Fly arrived at a gameplay loop that they knew worked, so they just rode that to the finish line. So what goes into that gameplay loop? A lot of talk right now revolves around the fact that Outriders has really cool gear, which it certainly does, and some really cool perks on that gear, which it certainly does. And I think a lot of people are going to argue that this is the secret sauce that holds Outriders together. I think it's much more fundamental than that. I think it's about the way that People Can Fly have built their class, enemy, level, and encounter design. I think this game would be fun and playable and enjoyable even without these insane perks. The perks are just the icing on the cake that make an already good game great. Class design is the foundation of this game. There are 4 unique classes that each have their own damage dealing archetype. The Devastator is a tank hybrid, is able to shield himself with rock and cause massive earthquakes and pile drive into his enemies from afar. The Trickster is your assassin, displacing space and time to slow enemies and teleport around the battlefield. Pyromancer is exactly what you expect. He burns things. And the Technomancer is your backline range DPS and support class, capable of dealing immense single target damage while freezing enemies. To play Destiny through with a single character is to experience most of what the game has to offer. Destiny's classes are different from one another, but subtly so, because much of the way that you play Destiny is about the weapons you have equipped, rather than the inherent design of the classes. In Outriders, the differences in class design are much more profound because a much larger portion of your moment-to-moment gameplay exists in your ability usage, and the way your abilities can be modified or further enhanced through weapon and gear perks. I don't think it's unfair to say that if you've played only one character in Outriders, you've really only experienced about a quarter of what the game has to offer. The classes are just so damn fun. My Trickster is like, I love her so much. She throws out these temporal knives to slow down bad guys. She's peeling back their skin with her spectral blade. She's going full blender mode, just mincing fools. She's teleporting here and there and everywhere, completely bamboozling the enemy. She's throwing up this massive time bubble thing that just makes me feel like Quicksilver in that X-Men Apocalypse scene. There's just so much in these kids. They're all stacked with these interesting, unique abilities that are also playable. You don't just use these classes. They aren't rag dolls that hold your weapons and armor. The classes are your weapons, and the gear you get just makes those classes stronger and more interesting. The issue of bullet builds is a hot topic at the moment. Long story short, 3 of the classes have a specific ability that massively buffs weapon damage, and if you mod it and combine it with specific perks, you can have 100% uptime on this, and it just absolutely shreds everything. There's a lot of build diversity in Outriders at the moment, and more of it is coming online every day as people gear up and theory craft new builds, but these bullet builds were by far the strongest, given the fact that every anomaly damage focused build just is nowhere near as powerful. People quickly figured all of this out, so every guide on YouTube was selling bullet builds dime a dozen, and as a result, within the first week the game was out, these abilities were nerfed, and no buffs were provided to any class to compensate for this. For the record, I think these abilities actually suck because they're boring. They don't deepen the playable experience of your class, they're just the ability equivalent of weapons go brrr. Having said that, this is a PvE game, and those abilities, they weren't hurting anyone. People were just using them because they gave them a clear shot at beating endgame content, and if that's what people want to do, then just let them do it. At the very least, if People Can Fly had paired these nerfs with appropriate buffs to other abilities, particularly underperforming anomaly abilities, I think these changes wouldn't have met the swift outcry they did. Anyway, outside of this issue, I don't think anyone can argue the fact that People Can Fly delivered some amazing class design here, and this is going to be one of the biggest reasons that people will stick with this game, to level all 4 classes and experience what they have to offer. Gunplay is a different story. Coming back to the Destiny example, you may not want to play Destiny for its classes, but you'd certainly play it for its guns, where each individual archetype or exotic feels so damn unique. To pick up a weapon in Destiny is to begin a relationship with it, to caress it gently and whisper sweet nothings into its ear in the hope that it will share with you its secrets, the nuances of its recoil direction, the layering of its sound design, the snappiness of its draw and aim speeds, or the generosity of its aim assist. This relationship with a weapon is inherently harder to achieve in third-person games because in addition to communicating all of those subtleties, you're also forced to give the player a lot of information about the locomotion of the character holding that weapon, their position, their movement speed from cover, their body weight shift as they round corners. Still, The Division did a fantastic job of this and carved out some really unique feeling weapons and weapon archetypes that feel distinct within your arsenal. Outriders doesn't achieve this. There are a limited range of weapons, assault rifles, double guns, which are basically like assault rifles, SMGs, which are basically like assault rifles but short range, LMGs, which are basically like assault rifles but with more recoil, pump-action shotguns, automatic shotguns, rifles of both the bolt-action and automatic variants, and sidearms. I'm being a little reductive in the way I'm describing them, but they definitely don't carve out the unique profiles that you might hope for. Within the assault rifle, SMG, double gun, and LMG categories in particular, the similarities between them are just too similar, and the differences not different enough. There are legendaries in this game, but from what I can tell, their legendary status comes from appearance and the perks they have. They don't come from unique handling profiles that make them feel distinct from other weapons in the game. Don't quote me on that. It's possible that as I play and collect more legendaries, I'll find other things, but I've got about 10 so far, and they all feel pretty much the same as everything else I've used. None of this is a damning assessment, by the way. We play different games for different reasons. I suspect the main thing pulling you back towards Outriders will be the satisfaction of using your spectral blade to fillet a group of mercenaries, more than it will be your desire to fire a specific weapon you've picked up. When it comes to level design, enemy design, and encounter design, I think it's best to talk about these things together because here in Outriders, these things really can't exist without one another. So what does that mean? I think if you took an elite from Halo and you put it in a big round room with no cover, or a long corridor with lots of cover, or a beachhead with a mix of open space and cover, that enemy type will work no matter where you put it. Its functionality exists independent of the environment that it's in. I think most Bungie designed enemies are like this, and it's one of the secrets to their combat formula. In Outriders, the functionality of enemies is intrinsically linked to the environment that they exist in. Riflemen exist to sit behind cover and pepper you with light damage. If you were to put them into a wide open space with no cover, you'd immediately just explode them and they'd pose no challenge. Same goes with snipers, who exist exclusively in the longer arenas where you have to cross a lot of distance to reach them. If they spawned in smaller areas, you just run straight up to them and explode them. Same goes for the monster variant enemies, which almost all run straight up to you and attempt to eat your face. These enemies always exist in areas with almost no cover because you need to be able to shoot them as they approach you, and if your line of sight was obstructed on their approach, then that enemy type would feel suffocating and unfair. Enemies in this game are essentially environmental assets. They are turrets that are strategically placed, or they are wind-up cars that are pulled back and launched towards you. Enemy AI in this game is really dumb because enemies don't need to be smart. They just need to know where to stand and what their lines are. The stage is set so that the moment you walk in, it's lights, camera, action. On the whole, this works extremely well. I would say that the biggest reason the campaign doesn't feel repetitive is that People Can Fly knew how to set up these arenas to always be engaging and knew how to move between the different styles of combat at regular intervals to keep things feeling fresh. I loved walking into a trench warfare arena knowing that I'd have to figure out how to cross no man's land. I loved walking into an industrial block knowing that I'd be able to utilize cover for a precious few seconds while I reload or wait for abilities to charge. I loved walking into wide open forested areas knowing that my AoE focused build was going to shine here as enemies hurtle towards me relentlessly. There's enough familiarity within the structure for you to plan your approach, but enough variance to keep you on your toes, and I really loved that. There are some oppressive factors within this formula though. The accuracy tuning of ranged enemies is a little bit ridiculous. I mean, as soon as you pop your head out, every single rifleman just immediately snaps to you like they're using an aimbot. Snipers, oh my god. There are big problems with snipers. These guys can shoot you from like 6 football fields away and they simply do not miss. and when they do hit you, it knocks you out of cover. So all the riflemen are like, yeah boy, this is our time to shine. The aggressiveness of the monster enemies as well could probably do with some adjustment. They just dogpile you so relentlessly, especially when you're playing solo, and they stagger you and they hit you, and some of them will shake your screen, so you can kind of get caught in this stagger loop where you just don't get the chance to aim your weapon and you just get shreked. These things all need some adjustment to give the player just a little more room to breathe. The last thing I find really fascinating about Outriders is its push-forward combat formula, which stands out as a really unique addition to the looter-shooter genre. Push-forward combat is a term popularized by id Software when they were explaining the design philosophy underpinning Doom 2016. They argued that in order for the game to communicate the fearlessness, brutality, and power of the Doomslayer, there couldn't be moments when he was in retreat. Put another way, cover is for cowards, and the Doomslayer ain't no coward. The result was a gameplay loop that required the Doomslayer to glory kill his enemies for both health and ammo, pushing the player out of more passive modes of play and into a constant dance of all-out frontline assault. Outriders does something similar. Each class is able to heal itself by doing damage in a particular way. The Trickster and the Devastator heal from dealing close-range damage, the Pyromancer heals by applying burn damage, and the Technomancer heals from any damage dealt, since locking him into long-range healing wouldn't work with the way a lot of the endgame encounters are designed. What this model does more than anything else is turn Outriders into a game about momentum. When your character is rolling and it's just killing things to get buffs and it's mowing down fodder, you just fucking push because you are just getting so much healing all the time. In my view, this is actually the most aggressively implemented form of push-forward combat I've ever experienced. Bloodborne had it, but you only used it to recover health after you made a mistake. Doom had it, but you used your glory kills like a sort of punctuation mark in between your assaults. Here in Outriders, it's just this endless carnage that's never supposed to end. You are constantly just in this bloodlust state where you are just pushing your character to its absolute limit because that's the only way your class can get the healing it needs to survive. The flip side to this is that when this momentum is interrupted, Outriders can really break down in a way that Doom or Bloodborne can't. Health regen is capped at 50% if your health gets low enough, so if you're playing the Trickster and you're pinned down in a long area with snipers and riflemen off in the distance, you're pretty screwed then, unless you have some health regen perks or weapon stats that will allow you to heal at range. A simple change allowing you to regen to full health when in cover wouldn't break the game, and it would allow classes like the Trickster or the Pyromancer to regain their footing in preparation for their next assault. The minor issues I've listed in this section, the balancing, the gunplay, some of the more oppressive enemy design, none of it takes away from the raw thrill of this game's combat. Every moment in this game feels like that scene in The Predator where they're just shooting and yelling, only instead of shooting trees, I'm shooting bad guys. I'm just unloading magazines and yelling and sometimes reloading and then more yelling. It's this feeling of power that these games are always trying to give us, but it's so complete and unrestrained here, and it only gets better and better the deeper you get into the endgame. One thing we take for granted in this genre is the idea that the campaign is this thing that you kind of get through so you can then reach the endgame, which is where you're going to spend the majority of your time. The campaign experience is less about loot and progression and more about mission design or set piece moments, stuff that's trying to appeal to a broader audience than the Skinner box oriented players who are intending to stick with it for the long run. Outriders bucks this trend by baking its core in-game progression systems into the campaign experience, such that in Outriders, you're always playing the endgame even when you're not. The way it works is that items have unique perks. These perks range from the pretty standard get some healing when you do damage or improve your crit chance, right through to absolutely insane perks like your enemies' corpses explode, inflicting massive damage and bleeds on everything, or every 2 seconds you call down a massive lightning bolt on your target, or killing a target instantly reloads your magazine such that you never ever have to reload. These perks can appear on any item that drops, with more powerful perks appearing on the rarer legendary items. When you get an item with one of these perks, you can then deconstruct it, which adds the perk to your crafting pool. You can then put that perk on any other item you please. So you could have some shitty blue item that drops and you can put a tier 3 legendary perk on it just because you feel like it. Playing through the campaign of Outriders is the first part of your endgame journey because you're unlocking all of the tier 1 and tier 2 perks, many of which are just as powerful as the tier 3 legendary stuff depending on their effects or how you combine them with others. And even if you've already got those perks, breaking down items gives you valuable currencies you can use to improve the core stats of the items you get later on. Simply put, at every point in your Outriders playthrough, there are no wasted drops. Everything is useful to you, either right then or later on at the endgame. That is pretty much the only looter I can say that of, and it's fucking awesome. Coming back to the perks, oh man, I just would say how absolutely, like, it's insane what People Can Fly have done with these. Insane in the best possible terms. Every new perk you get is like, what the fuck? How is that allowed? Surely that's not allowed. Surely there must be some kind of mistake, but no, the developers did it. And the magic of it is that the game still hangs together. It's not difficult to create a simple but compelling loot game. Like Ghost of Tsushima's multiplayer mode did exactly that, with really straightforward stats that augmented your class rolls. It's really, really hard to create gear this powerful and this complex without your entire game collapsing under the weight of it. This is what broke the Division 1 back in the day, where the balancing of items and abilities was so off that the game was essentially unplayable until the 1.3 patch completely rebalanced the game. Here, People Can Fly built one of the most audacious sets of perks we've ever seen in a game, and it didn't break the game. They got it right the first time, and that's just insanity. So, what about the endgame activities? What are you actually doing? Well, there's two halves to Outriders. There's the campaign areas, which are supported by the world tier system, and then there's the endgame expeditions, which have their own challenge level that you move up and through. During the campaign, you're going to be advancing your world tier. It's what you expect it to be, it just makes enemies stronger, and they have a higher chance of dropping you good loot. I finished it around world tier 8 of 15, and then I grinded out the remaining world tier levels by doing various side quests that gave me plenty of items and experience. Eventually, you're going to hit a point, even at world tier 15, when you can't get any upgrades from there, and you have to move over to the expedition part of the game to do that. You can get world drops that are at your level, and you can then increase their level using currencies that you get from expeditions, but generally speaking, this isn't the most efficient use of your time. As it stands, you're going to finish the campaign, and then there really isn't much reason to revisit those areas. There's a lot of unused real estate here that could have made the endgame feel fuller and more varied, and this game really could have done with an endgame focused adventure mode that kind of bounced us around the map to casually farm and earn endgame gear, but at a less efficient rate than the more demanding expeditions. Expeditions are similar to the missions you play through the campaign, but like supercharged, just totally nuts. Think like 5 times the amount of enemies of a regular mission and like 3 times the number of bosses. They typically have 3 arenas that you move through, and yeah, you just kill everything. Some of them do make you stand on a point, but that's about as complicated as it gets. It's just carnage for 10 or 15 minutes and then it's over. There's about a dozen of these expeditions, and they certainly are not created equal. The monster variant missions are much easier when you're playing in a group because you can basically just set up these blender compositions that can easily group up enemies and mince them. Playing solo though, you might find the militia missions easier since you can sit back in cover and pick your targets, or just take a moment to breathe without swarms of enemies constantly staggering you and shaking your screen. I don't think it's a problem that these expeditions are different difficulties or encourage different styles of play, because they're encouraging you to just change things up, rather than all expeditions having a one-size-fits-all style solution. The biggest problem with these expeditions is that the level of the loot that drops is tied to the challenge tier. So if I need level 48 gear to improve my build, I can only get that gear from challenge tier 13. Challenge tier 13 is hard if you're not geared for it. It can feel really unfair and oppressive and frustrating to push through these high level tiers, especially when you're playing solo, but that's what you have to do in order to get gear at your level. There's no casual, relaxed activity you can play at endgame to slowly but steadily farm gear at your own level. It has to be these really intense, really challenging, higher level tiers, and that feels like a big gap in a game like this. The world tier system provides a template for the solution here. Just let people always earn max level gear, but give them more of it at the higher challenge tier levels. It worked during the campaign, no reason it wouldn't work at the end game as well. The other issue is the fact that expeditions are all about fast clears. The faster you clear, the better the rewards you get. That's fine if you want everyone to be focused on speed clearing builds. I mean, Diablo is kind of like that because the whole game, all the class design, it's all about dealing damage. Outriders isn't like that. Outriders has entire skill trees, class abilities, and perks devoted to support or CC or tanking or healing. None of that is encouraged at the endgame when everyone has a big timer over their head and the goal is to just melt everything as fast as possible. It's led to a situation where Devastators, who are the lowest DPS class, are being kicked from groups when they matchmake because people don't want to bring a class they perceive to be low DPS. The game can survive with just speedrunning as the endgame goal, but the full potential of this game's class and build diversity won't be realized until these timers are removed and the focus shifts towards completion. Unless you give support or tank or CC or healing builds the chance to thrive, people are only going to burn out quickly on what will appear a shallow and repetitive endgame experience. I also think something needs to be done about the solo experience. In co-op, not only are enemies targeting people other than you, not only are you benefiting from a wider range of debuffs, but you also have infinite revives. You can revive yourself once, and then your teammates can revive you infinitely. When playing solo, every enemy is looking exclusively at you. You deal way less damage because you don't have as many debuffs on your target, and if you die once, you failed. There's no self-revive, it's just mission failed, we'll get them next time. People ask me, should I play Outriders solo? It's probably the most common question I've had so far about this game. And I'd say for the campaign, yeah, it really works. It's balanced. The world tier system lets you go at the speed that you want to go at, and you're always getting gear at your own level. It just feels right. The whole thing just works, I think, really well for solo play. When it comes to the endgame, I really don't think this has been properly designed for solo players. You can do it. You can absolutely do it, for sure, no doubt about that, but it's just way less interesting and I think a lot more frustrating than when you're playing grouped up. The last big gap is around targeted farming. Right now, there's absolutely no way to target specific items. There are so many weapons in this game, so many gear sets, so many legendary perks, but getting your hands on any one of these is pure RNG. There are builds out there dependent on specific perks or gear set bonuses that you might just never get if RNGesus is unkind to you. I get that this is a tomorrow problem rather than a day one launch problem, but it's certainly going to become more of an issue as long-term players become more and more frustrated that their hours invested aren't resulting in the drops they want and need. Having said all of this, we need to take a step back and recognize that as far as in-game experiences go in looter shooters, we are so blessed to have received this on day one. Almost none of the games that make up the body of this genre were able to launch with endgame content on day one, and just like their insane perk system, People Can Fly did it. I don't love this endgame right now, but with a few minor tweaks, yeah, I would absolutely love it. The problems that hold this current endgame back are pretty easily solved. For those that come to Outriders in a few months after the technical issues have been ironed out, I expect that these sorts of changes will have been implemented, and you're going to experience an endgame that is subtly different, but vastly better than the one we have now. Which brings us to an important point: the future. Outriders, despite its glaring technical flaws, is a massive success for People Can Fly and Square Enix. Where the Avengers never managed to crack 25,000 concurrent players on Steam, Outriders was riding high at over 125,000 concurrent players at one point, and the availability of the game on Game Pass made it one of the most played games on Xbox during the launch week. Outriders is huge, and as I said, I expect it has a big future ahead of it. But I also expect it to be a somewhat rocky future. People Can Fly have gone to great lengths to communicate the fact that Outriders is not a live service, but already it kind of feels like we're getting many of the worst parts of the live service experience with none of the benefits to back it up. We've got the always online requirements, the server issues, the horrendous technical state, and this week we got our first round of nerfs, making expedition timers shorter and taking a big whack out of a number of abilities that were central to players' builds. If you thought that Outriders was going to be a safe haven from PvE nerfs, People Can Fly certainly disabused you of that notion this week. There's a bigger challenge that this game faces though, and that's the fact that there's no new content coming, at least none that's confirmed. People Can Fly have said they're open to making meaty expansions that meaningfully enlarge the game experience, and that means a content drought in a genre that's really not used to that. All of these games promise these 10-year roadmaps and endless playability, and here's Outriders saying, no, that's all you're getting, see you later, maybe. A lot of people are going to struggle to wrap their heads around this, and they're going to get very angry. We're going to see really stupid headlines from publications being like, Outriders player base drops 80% since launch. It's like, dude, yeah, no shit. People have finished the game and they've moved on to other things just the way People Can Fly intended. I think it's important that we understand and appreciate People Can Fly's goals here. They set out to make us a complete experience, free from microtransactions and free from the frustrating time gating that we're so used to when we play these games. The trade-off is that, yeah, I mean, it's like that whole, the candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long. For me, Outriders is one of the rare AAA games that delivered most of what it said it would, technical issues aside. I really applaud People Can Fly for making this type of game, and Square Enix for publishing it. I don't plan to play Outriders for thousands of hours. I plan to play a little more of it, and then walk away happy. And if we get more content, great, that's awesome. But if we don't, that's also okay. I don't want every publisher and developer thinking that every gamer wants every game to be playable every minute of every day. It's one of the things that really stifles innovation in this industry. I love what People Can Fly have done here. It's really broken at the moment, but when all the pieces are properly assembled, we're going to be left with a real gem that I hope other developers and publishers will take note of. And specific to the looter shooter genre, Outriders may be the new kid on the block, but I think it has a hell of a lot to teach other games in this space. Well done, People Can Fly. You certainly showed us a thing or two with this one. One last thing before we go, thanks to Nvidia and MSI, I also had the chance to play Outriders on the new GP66 Leopard series laptop. This laptop is a big deal because it has the latest gen RTX 30 series GPU built in, meaning that you get all the benefits of the latest gen GPU hardware in portable form. What are those benefits, you ask? Well, obviously, the raw processing power in Nvidia's 30 series cards is unmatched, delivering you the best frame rates and resolutions on the market today. In addition to that, you also get ray tracing, which is a technique that simulates light using an algorithm, resulting in the most realistic rendition of light we've ever seen in video games. The most impressive tech is DLSS, which stands for Deep Learning Super Sampling. What this does is it renders your game at a lower resolution while making it look like it's running at a higher resolution. The result is that your GPU gets more headroom that it can spend on higher graphical settings and higher frame rates. When I tested DLSS on the MSI GP66 laptop, I was getting an average of around 140 frames with DLSS off, but an average of around 180 frames when I turned DLSS on. Pair that with the laptop's 240Hz refresh rate screen, and you have yourself a seriously smooth experience, even when the on-screen action is thickest. The MSI GP66 is equipped with complete I/O ports to support data transmission or display output, with all ports located at the back to avoid messy cables on the side. Its build quality is superb with super firm hinges and an easy one-handed opening. It also comes complete with Wi-Fi 6, designed to deliver lightning-fast gameplay and seamless streaming experiences. To learn more about Nvidia's GPU lineup or more about the MSI GP66, click the link in the description below. Thanks Nvidia and MSI for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching it. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down so I know to do better for next time. If you enjoyed yourself, consider subscribing, and if you really enjoyed yourself, maybe consider hitting that notification bell so you never miss a video. You can see my patrons here on the left. They're awesome. They're amazing. If you want to join them, check out my Patreon page. Thank you again. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.